Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us here today. Anyone who feels comfortable is more than welcome to turn their cameras on. We're happy to have you. For those of you that don't know, I'm Amanda Field. I am chairperson of the working group of the Long Island Water Conference. We're holding this meeting here today to give information about the applications for the American Rescue Plan Act grant. And that grant was awarded as a federal grant for $6 million for this year for 2021. 1.5 million of that is being given to districts who qualify for emerging contaminants, approximately 50,000 per district, up to, we think, about 30 districts. And about 4.5 million will go towards conservation. This webinar is with respect to the emerging contaminants portion. Because this is a federal grant, there are several requirements that we must comply to, and that is what we're going to review today. We have Nassau County that is joining us, and Nassau County has given us Hagerty, which is their consulting firm, who is going to review several aspects of those compliance requirements. And we expect to receive, hopefully, we're always hoping to receive future grant funding. And that being said, that's why we're going to go over what those federal requirements are. Some of those things are the procurement policies that we hope to have in place, and those will need to be updated. We ask that you hold your questions till the end, because we expect there to be several questions. And obviously, if there's questions after today, we will have people for you to reach out to, both from the county, from Hagerty. And I just want to have a shout out. We've had several meetings over the course of the last couple months. Dina Scott has been instrumental in helping both the county, myself, everyone from the Long Island Water Conference that's been on this committee, and Hagerty. Stan Carey's been helpful, and several other people. So without further ado, we've talked about this. I'm going to introduce Kristen Kerr, who's going to go over the program compliance requirements, and then Latoya James, also from Hagerty, is going to speak to you about how to apply, and then we'll have some closing remarks. So Kristen, if you could introduce yourself and go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Kerr, as Amanda mentioned. My team here at Hagerty is helping support the county in administering the groundwater conservation program grants, as Amanda mentioned earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you today as we go through a little bit about the program itself, and also some of the compliance requirements, as Amanda mentioned earlier. Can I just get a thumbs up if everyone's able to see my screen? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So as Amanda mentioned, of the groundwater conservation program that the county has implemented, there is a $1.5 million program for water quality improvements, and this provides grants up to $50,000 to public and private water suppliers in Nassau County. Water districts are eligible to start applying for these grants in particular, but we did want to make you aware of some of the compliance and regulations surrounding the use of federal funds. Under this program, grant funds can be used for studying, planning, designing of emerging contamination occurring within the water district, for the purchase of equipment, materials, and supplies to advance the removal of emerging contamination from the water supply, installation of equipment to advance removal of emerging contaminants, purchase of support equipment such as information technology related to systems integral to the treatment process within the district's distribution system, the development of operation manuals, guidelines, and materials to use by the water supplier personnel, specifically pointed to the removal of emerging contamination, and then ongoing maintenance activities of systems already online and removing emerging contamination. And then finally, the defray the cost of laboratory testing for emerging contaminants. We are going to kind of come back to eligible activities a little bit later on in regards to procurement, but wanted to really lay out how these funds can be used for the water districts that are applying for these grants. Given that water districts may not have as much experience working, administering programs with federal grants, we wanted to break out, as Amanda mentioned earlier, some of the compliance requirements, and also really some of the components that will be listed within the grant agreement that will be signed as a part of the contractual agreement with the water district in the county. So there are a few things that we want to make sure are being considered before submitting an application. In particular, if the activities of the project that you are proposing are going to be allowable under this program. I think I want to back up a moment too, because you'll continue to see CLFRF throughout this document. The funds in particular that are passing through Nassau County government are the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. These funds were appropriated under the American Rescue Act by Congress earlier this year and are really are able to support broad infrastructure projects, specifically around water and stormwater infrastructure. And in order to kind of streamline the process, the U.S. Treasury has aligned the eligible activities with activities that are allowable under the Drinking Water and Clean Water State Revolving Funds. So if your district is accustomed to submitting projects to the state for that program, think of the activities that you tend to submit in those applications as well. And so they will align with that program, those two programs in particular. Additionally, it's worth considering the time frame and the period of performance, which we'll get into a little bit more down below. But for the use of these funds, costs can cover any expenditures after March 3rd of 2021. If a project that was planned and started prior to this date exists and that you want to apply the funds towards that existing project, that is okay, so long as the cost of that specific cost for the project is after March 3rd, 2021. These funds are also available through December 31st of 2026. Additionally, as a part of these funds, the county, as the recipient of these funds, will be required to make reports to the U.S. Treasury. And so the county will be working with recipients of these funds, the water districts, to request reporting information on a quarterly and annual basis. And the reporting is really specifically to obligations and expenditures of the funds. And more information will be coming down the line in December for reporting. Given the threshold of this project, there are not as many reporting requirements associated with this project in particular, which is very nice. So as a part of the use of these funds, like any other federal grant, recipients of these funds are required to comply with the uniform guidance. And so what that means is there are a series of, there are aspects in the management of these funds that the federal government has set forth like a framework and guidelines to be able to manage the use of these funds. And so, and the most critical component of this is that for infrastructure projects, that there is competitive bidding included with ongoing contractor oversight. And so the uniform guidance sets out some of those policies and controls that can typically be found in purchasing policies, conflict of interest policies, and internal policies for verifying the eligibility of bidders. And so when we are discussing the procurement policy in particular, and we've been working with the Long Island Water District, is understanding that not all procurement policies may necessarily have the level of competitive bidding requirements as required by the uniform guidance. We've been considering alternative options to help support the districts, like aligning with Nassau County's procurement policy in particular as one option. Additionally, we've been discussing about the letter, and Dana, feel free to jump in on this component too. I just want to make sure that, I'm not overspeaking, but the Long Island Water Conference is helping support kind of looking at procurement policies in particular for themselves in order for all the water districts to align. Is there anything that you'd like me to add, Dana, in this section in particular?
Perhaps maybe this is just a good time for me to make mention of the fact that purchases of goods or construction contracts require adherence, as Kristen had mentioned, to a list of compliance requirements that we may not have necessarily planned for in advance of being noted of this award of federal funds. Non-competitive procurements such as professional engineering services provides for procurement of eligible costs whereby many of the technical compliance requirements would become not applicable. So I certainly, for my district, and would encourage other districts as well, a recommendation to submit for reimbursement of engineering costs incurred as part of water treatment projects. This will enable us to remain in compliance with the requirements of the federal grant funding. It kind of gives us a little less boxes that have to be checked, provides for a little bit of a path of least resistance for this round of funding. I know the Long Island Water Conference is discussing considering putting together a cooperative bid for the next round of funding, which we're not quite there yet. So that's to be determined and to be discussed. But particularly for this round, I think it would provide for the path of least resistance and most beneficial for districts to submit for procurement of professional engineering services incurred as part of a water treatment project.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dina.
Thank you.
So moving into compliance itself, these are some of the activities that are laid out within the grant agreements themselves, and will allow as subrecipients of these funds, you to know the framework of compliance that will be required. So as mentioned earlier, cost must be allowable activities and meet the eligibility requirements as set forth by the U.S. Treasury. That guidance document right now is their interim final rule, which as a part of this backup documentation will have links to that guidance as well for everyone's visibility. Additionally, equipment and real property must be purchased, tracked, and maintained in accordance with applicable rules or applicable regulations. And so really we're just asking that specifically if equipment is purchased, that you're just tracking it. And so because the county may be asking as a part of ongoing monitoring, just the tracking and associated costs with the equipment purchases. As I mentioned earlier, the funds must, all of these funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024. And that's really just associated with the county making that obligation to the water district. But the water districts will be able to continue to spend funds through December 31st of 2026. Additionally, I don't think this may be applicable to the specific program, but if any program income is generated, it must be tracked. The U.S. Treasury is planning to provide additional guidance on how to track and report program income. As mentioned earlier, the county has an obligation to monitor all subrecipients of these funds, and so so the monitoring detail and frequency will be based on a risk assessment. Under this program, it'll be a basic. It should be a basic set of monitoring that will be performed at the end of either closeout of the project or quarterly as well. And I wanted to mention too that funds will be distributed, and it's not on the sheet here, but will be added as this document before we send it out. But the funds will also be first paid 50% upfront, and then with reimbursement of 50% at closeout. And as a part of the closeout process, the water districts will be required to provide supporting backup documentation on how their funds were used. Additionally, water districts must comply with civil rights compliance requirements and civil rights laws and regulations that are set forth in the uniform guidance. And additionally, organizations receiving funds that are subject to requirements for reporting executive compensation as well. As a part of receiving these funds, water districts will be required to register in sam.gov, which instructions will be sent out upon award notice. And then additionally, as a part of the recipient of these funds, Nassau County will have to go through a single audit because of receiving more than $750,000 in federal funds. And as a part of that audit, there may be specific questions that come up in regards to the use of these funds that may come back to the water districts. And so, so what we recommend just in general for everything is any decisions that are made, any documentation for purchases that you are collecting is really just have a file in a centralized place that shows how you're documenting the project itself. And really that should be able to provide enough information if an audit if an expense is audited in the single audit this year. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Latoya James. Latoya is going to be the reviewer for the applications that come through the county's Boost Nassau grant application portal. The county did stand up a portal a few months back, a centralized portal to submit all grant applications. And we've received a few to date. After this webinar, if any of the districts that have already applied would like to reapply and resubmit a new application, they can go ahead and do so. We are going to send out instructions following this call to those specific districts that have already applied to be able to resubmit an application if you so choose to. And so Latoya is going to go through a little bit of the application process itself for those of you who are either planning to resubmit an application or are planning to submit a new application.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everybody. So the application process, when you go into the portal, I want you to remember it does not have the ability to save. So make sure when you go through that you have all the documents you need, you know where they are, so that you can submit it all at one time. Because if you exit without submitting, then you have to start over. You do need to upload all the required documents such as the IRS determination letter for your 501(c) if you are one, your 2019 990, which is your tax return, and your New York State tax exemption letter. If you do not have these, if these do not apply to you, you can submit a letter, on your letterhead and upload that instead, stating that these do not apply to you and why. I want you to remember that the award limit is $50,000. A few of you have submitted for a little bit more than that, or a lot more than that, but the limit is $50,000. Administrative overhead, I haven't seen many with administrative overhead, but the limit is 10%. So if you have administrative costs, you do need to, $5,000 will be the limit if you request the full $50,000. So Kristen spoke about the performance dates or the start and end dates. The project can have a start date prior to March 3rd, 2021, but only eligible costs incurred during March 3rd through March 3rd of this year, 2021, through December 31st of 2024 can be paid with the funding. She already spoke a little bit about that. All costs incurred by December 2024 must be expended by December 31st, 2026. There's a section in the application where you need to complete your specific goals of the program. Please put details in there. What is this program? What is it going to provide? What are the funds going to be used for? That helps with the processing and limits questions that we might have to ask later. And of course, it's processed on a first come, first served basis. So get it in as soon as you can. It's not a difficult application process. It's fairly easy. If you have an application and you want to resubmit because maybe you didn't upload all the documents or your budget or request was higher than the 50,000, go ahead and do so. Keeping in mind, first come, first served, and you cannot save the application.
Thank you, Latoya.
You're welcome.
I want to thank the Long Island Water Conference for hosting this call, especially. If you do have questions that do come up, and we are happy to take questions now as well, but if you have questions that come up, we will send our information after this call. We do have the county here with us as well. We have David Viana from the county here as well. And so we wanted to make sure we give a little bit of time before this call ends for questions and answers. So if anyone has any, you can either write them in the chat box to the right, or go ahead and ask them over the conference call itself. Go ahead, Dina.
I just wanted to reiterate the importance that one of the requirements with respect to federal procurement standards is that all districts do have an adopted conflict of interest policy in place. So I just did want to reiterate that to ensure that if that's not something that everyone does have on file, that is a requirement of the grant. I also was looking for clarification. The 50% at closeout, is that closeout upon completion of the project? I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yes, thank you, Dina. Yes, it will be upon completion of the project. So the county will be sending out a form to all applicants receiving these funds to attest to project completion. And at that point, there will be a request for information for supporting backup detail that will be submitted to issue the final payment.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Let's see, we received a question from Mindy Germain that said, is there any information on the conservation portion of this funding, timing, any preparation we can do now, and how will it be rolled out? I think I'd say at this time, information is not ready to be rolled out yet. We're still kind of in the program design phase of that project in particular. But I will say that, kind of as Dina mentioned earlier, is knowing that there's additional funding coming over the next few months, that kind of looking through the key consideration document that we just went through that we'll be sending out after this call, to start considering what kind of internal controls you can put in place, and especially around procurement itself, to be prepared for any type of work that you plan to issue with that new federal funding. I see a question. Can you attach the copy of your presentation to this chat? Yes, I think I can do that. But we do plan to send out also this document after this call with my information as well, and LaToya's, and details for applying itself. So we can do that to make sure everyone on this call gets it after this call. And the question, there was a question from Kathleen Cannon that says, is there a sample procurement policy that must be adopted by the water districts? The county does have their procurement policy that you can align to for the purposes of competitive procurement. Other than that, there is not a sample procurement policy that exists at this point.
You had mentioned yesterday, and this is probably something for the business managers to discuss, so I don't know if it came up, Dina, but the possibility of a standalone policy, did that come up in your call after we got off?
We didn't speak necessarily to the standalone policy, but we did have a conversation about whether your procurement policy needs to be updated to include all of the aspects to comply with uniform guidance, or if a new standalone policy can exist specific to purchasing goods or services with federal funds. And so we discussed that either or could happen, either or would be acceptable, but really it's worth considering the restraints that it may place on each of the water districts. If they add these compliance requirements to their normal procurement policy, it may be challenging down the road, not having to need to comply with federal grants for ongoing regular day work. And so it may make sense to have your own standalone policy that is followed in these specific for the use of these specific funds.
So just to say that to piggyback off that, that would be my recommendation, both for our district and any other districts, is that we adopt a separate standalone procurement policy that's specific only to the procurement and administration of federal funds. That policy would require very specific language to be included, but we can adhere to that policy only when procuring federal funds, as opposed to that policy not interfering with our day-to-day procurements and purchases.
Thank you, Dina. I also see a question from Jason Bell. If there's an application deadline, at this time, there is no deadline for applying.
I have a question. If I understand this correctly, costs incurred for emerging contaminant treatment after, I think you said March 3rd of 2021. Would that include laboratory costs and materials purchased for treatment of water?
Yes, that would. Yep.
Would that also include hydrogen peroxide purchasing?
I don't know specifically. I'm not as familiar with that. I'd have to check. I'd have to check, honestly. I wouldn't think that would be non-allowable. I would just have to do a little bit more research.
Kristen, hydrogen peroxide is something that's used as part of the water treatment process.
Thank you, Dina. This is not my background or expertise specifically, so I do appreciate that. And yes, then if it's a cost associated with the elimination of contaminants, then yes.
I just want to
Okay.
say that purchases of things such as hydrogen peroxide or anything that's a goods related or construction related comes with a significantly more, a longer list of compliance requirements that are required to be adhered to. Hence my recommendation to kind of stick to professional services under this round in an effort to not have to adhere to as many requirements. The list is a little extensive, and because we did not plan for these procurements in advance of the receipt of federal funding, that for lack of a better word, kind of provides for the path of least resistance. Purchase of hydrogen peroxide would require a lot of boxes to be checked that we may not necessarily have procured in that manner.
Okay. I like the path of least resistance. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah, I think we all do.
It was a very
Especially with federal awards.
It was a great creative solution from Dina. Thank you. And I will say Dina's been a great advocate for the water districts as well and providing us a lot of information for this program. So thank you. We also received a few other questions. So if from Kamika, we have a question. If you've already submitted an application, can that application be sent back or should a new application be created? At this time, we are asking folks to create a new application. And then if there's any information that you'd like us to pull over for this new application, we can go ahead and send you a copy or receipt of your old application. So we're going to send out instructions to those who actually already have applied following this call. All right, we have another question. How is the $50,000 limit applied? If a municipality operates multiple districts, is the municipality limited to one grant or is each district eligible for a grant? Did I hear someone answer?
Who made that application? Where's that coming from?
That question is coming from John Ray. I don't know if John's still on the call.
John Reinhardt?
Perhaps his username is just John REI.
Yes, Michael, it's me. It's John
Hi, Johnny.
Reinhardt.
How you doing, buddy? Now I understand
Excellent.
where it's coming from. It's a good
Okay.
question, but explain it.
So the town of Hempstead has consolidated 6 separate districts under the town of Hempstead as a municipal corporation. But we operate 6 separate districts financially. But sometimes grants are worded that a municipality is limited to a single grant. And I'm just curious if the municipality is considered each of the separate operating districts or the town of Hempstead as the applicant.
I would have to confirm with the county specifically, but I do believe each district would be able to apply for their own grant. But we can provide follow-up context in our email as follow-up.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Kristen, we'll coordinate and just make sure we get the right answer to them.
Okay, great. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
We also received a question. I assume that we need to follow WMBE requirements. And do we need to send that information to the county or does each district require to maintain their own documentation and compliance? And the answer is that each district is required to maintain their own documentation and compliance and specific to verifying that requirement would only happen if a particular expense for this program is audited through the county single audit. Otherwise, just maintenance of that documentation, like I mentioned earlier, and maybe a centralized file with all information regarding the expenditures for this program would be a good option for you to have a file in place in case the audit does pose any specific questions to the water district. All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Are there any other questions from those on the call that are outstanding?
I'm not sure if mine went through or not. This is Stan. Professional services, are laboratory services considered professional services?
Yes, laboratory services are included as an allowable cost specific to testing for emerging contaminants.
Right, but is it considered a professional service? Dina, I think you know where I'm going with this.
So I just, maybe if I can jump in and say that the laboratories we use, and maybe an engineer can speak further, is a very limited number. My personal opinion is that it would be considered a professional services because they're testing for very specific things, but that if that's something that you guys can look into on your end, just to make sure that you feel that it does define the qualifications of a professional services, because I would also recommend, if that is the case, that in addition to engineering costs, laboratory costs would also make a good consideration of something to submit for reimbursement for. I would certainly agree with that. I would just look for confirmation from the county that you do in fact deem laboratory services professional services. And I can help provide any additional information or answer any questions that you may have to that, because it is definitely more specialized as it relates to the water industry as a whole.
Definitely, we'll be happy to look into that and follow up in our follow-up email. Great. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you all for your time. And leave some time for the water conference to make any final remarks and closing it.
Okay, well, thank
I
you
just
very
wanna say
much.
one thing. I just want
Oh,
to say
go
one
ahead.
thing before
Go ahead.
Andy closes. I know this seems like a lot of work we're very appreciative of any money that we get in this industry. I know that it seems like 50,000, it's not a lot compared to everything that we're trying to get grants for, the cost of treatment, especially with all the treatment for emerging contaminants. We're very thankful for this money and any future money that we do receive. We do intend to request and receive more federal funding, especially, with more regulations that we expect to come down. So, this is very important that we've gone through these steps and through this process over the course of the last several months. We thank Hagerty, we thank the county, and, we thank the federal government, because we are going to continue to fight for more funding. So this was a very, very important step of what, we do expect what is to come. So I thank everybody on this call it seemed like in the last few months, this was very painful, but it was not for nothing. This was a very important step. So, thank you from the bottom of my heart on behalf of all water suppliers, because this is just, the first of many steps. We're going to receive a lot more funding. So thank you. So I'm going to let our chairman give a few remarks, and certainly, after this, you can contact the professionals on this call for questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda. On behalf of the Long Island Board Conference Executive Board, the entire membership, I certainly would like to thank Commissioner Amanda Fields for all the work and effort she put into bringing this program and helping us navigate everything. I also want to give a big thank you to Dina Scott from the Plainview Water District, our wonderful business manager, who really has been very helpful. I also want to thank the team at Hagerty, Kristen Kerr, Latoya James, and everybody else over there at Hagerty. And lastly, I'd like to thank our county executive, Laura Curran, and her entire team at Nassau County. And I'd like to thank all the participants today. And we're looking forward to a lot of success with this program. All right. Thank you all.
Sandy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Have a great day.
Bye.